I am a part of the backbone team that supports the Regional Housing Partnership along with the Mid-America Regional Council. Hannah Mitchell is my co-part, manager of housing. And today we're going to be sharing information and the reporting from our network mapping survey. So to just sort of give you some context and level setting, the Regional Housing Partnership is a collective impact initiative that exists, excuse me, to support and strengthen the housing ecosystem in the Kansas City region. Our three high-level goals are network and process, which is building a collaborative and regional process to strengthen the comprehensive housing system in the Kansas City region. We're focused on production and supply of housing, supporting the production and preservation of attainable housing across the region, as well as access and stability, increasing the stability and access to attain housing options for all residents. This project is directly tied to our effort to assess and strengthen the housing network and understand how the Regional Housing Partnership can better support you in your work. Following our official launch in late 2025, we partnered with the Visible Network Lab, which is a data science company that helps to measure and understand and evolve the personal and professional networks which influence communities and create a map of the regional housing network. The goal of this project was to identify who is currently active in the regional housing ecosystem, what services they provide, how they collaborate, and where expansion opportunities exist. Over 300 housing-related organizations across the Kansas City region, from community-based nonprofits to local governments and housing developers, were invited to participate in the survey to map housing production and preservation, related services, and the relationships across the region. Many of you are here today because you were invited and did complete the network mapping survey last year. Thank you so much for your participation. We understand that it was a lengthy survey. It took some time to complete, so we appreciate you giving your time and effort to that. By mapping relationships and evaluating the strengths and the source of the connections, we're hoping to identify any overlaps or redundancies, and this analysis can lay the groundwork for future collaboration efforts by demonstrating how networked approaches and add value, to the regional housing efforts across Kansas City. Today, we are joined by Visible Network Lab founder, Dr. Danielle Varda, as well as a data analyst on her team, Kendall Warwick Diaz. And they're going to share insights from the social network analysis report of the Regional Housing Partnership ecosystem. They will share highlights and key findings from the network survey report and explore opportunities to utilize this local data to strengthen the RHP network and regional housing efforts going forward. And at the end, we will discuss some further possibilities of how we can use the extremely powerful platform that VNL has called Partner, and ways that we can expand some on what the network survey showed us. If just a reminder one more time, if you're just coming into the webinar, if you could please mute yourself. And I will turn it over now to Dr. Varda.
Sorry. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Danielle Varda. I'm our CEO and founder at Visible Network Labs. We are an organization, as Carly just said, that is a data science company that is focused on making invisible networks visible. Our mission is to strengthen social connectedness at the individual and systems level. So it is always a great pleasure to get to work with communities like yours who are doing great work on the ground. Our hope is that we're adding data, science, technology to that work to help make decisions around how to go forward a little bit easier. So a few of these next slides are actually things Carly just said. I put them in here a little out of order. But these are some of the questions that Carly just mentioned around what the goals are of this project. Primarily, the top goal was that we wanted to know who's doing what around regional housing and what that looks like when we try to map it out and measure it. So Carly mentioned these three goals. So here they are just in writing for you to digest a little bit easier. Goal one is around network and processes. Goal two around production and supply, and goal three around access and stability. So what we tried to do was organize the results around these three goals. So you'll see these again as we go through that. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on how we approach this work. We really know that in communities there are um, people today working across sectors, public, private, and nonprofit sectors, doing what we refer to as the network way of working. So, where it used to be that you could kind of come to work and do your work on your own because you are the expert in that field, today there is a completely new norm, a new change of expectations that we will be able to achieve greater outcomes if we do that work together. So, our goal is to understand how we can bridge cross-sector ties in order to leverage resources, bring in new innovation, tackle tough problems. But we do know that that's not easy to do for a lot of folks. We are overwhelmed, our resources are scarce, and for some people, networking and building networks is not something that just comes natural. So, our hope is to bring some data to this way of working and also some tools that the community will be able to use as well to look up partners, see those connections, and build strategies going forward. So, just before I get into this, I do want to kind of level on some language that I'll be using. So, I use this word networks. You might be familiar with thinking about what this kind of work as a partnership, collective impact. Um, Collaboration. We call them networks because we operationalize um, the work as these nodes and lines. So let me just explain what those are. So what you're going to see are these nodes in some network maps. Those represent organizations or people sometimes. In this work, those represent organizations. And what we did is we asked organizations about their relationships with each other. Of course, there's a person behind that who does that work for us, but if that person were to leave the organization, we actually would still want to maintain the node as the organization. So that's how you'll see this here. We actually call that interorganizational network analysis. And then you'll see these relationships between them, so those lines, and that helps us understand how they're connected. So what's interesting if we just know they are connected, but what's more interesting is if we know how they are connected. So if they are, we can understand what they do together, the outcomes of that relationship. We also measure things like trust and perceptions of value of those relationships. And that's really helpful for better understanding of kind of the in-depth nature of the way folks work together, which helps to improve our understanding of how to go, where to go next. And the third type of data you'll see are these colors on the nodes, and we refer to those as attributes. Like in this case, what you're seeing here are colors that represent a sector. So that those kinds of attributes help us understand core relationships by understanding how they are connected, maybe why, and then those patterns. So those are the kinds of data that we collect in here, and then we show them in all kinds of different visual ways. I always say the network map is the front cover of the story of this community's network, and then you have to open the book, and that's where all the data are and the interesting patterns and learnings. So what we're trying to do is open that book a little bit here today. Oh, this looks like it went off the screen a little bit, but we do use a method called social network analysis. It is a mapping tool that maps relationships. It can evaluate the strength and source of those connections and identify overlaps and redundancies. As Carly mentioned, we had 313 organizations invited to answer the survey. We determined who those were with help of the team that we started working with at Mark in the beginning. We added some other kind of key informants to build that list. Of those, we had almost 50% respond to the survey, which is pretty big response rate, given that this kind of probably came out of the blue for a lot of folks. They weren't sure why we were doing this survey or just what it really was all about. But within those 154 respondents, we saw 2,828 relationships reported. Each one of those is a line between two of those nodes. So we have a ton of information about these relationships. We're going to show you a lot today, but not even half of what we've learned from this survey. The average number of relationship was 25, which kind of shows us how we have in this community a pretty strong set of organizations that are working actively together. So that wasn't new news. Now we just have data to show that in a more quantitative way. So I'll just say two last things. We do use this for evaluation and also understanding what we really wanted to do here was benchmark how the community was working together and how these organizations were connected. But over time, we can really look and see like which organizations are connected, where there are gaps, and we can use this to understand how well the network is working and then to look at progress over time. So right now, today, we were really exploratory. We just really wanted to know what was going on and add some visual to that. But for that, we're not evaluating it today, not saying whether this is good or bad, but we can in the future answer really important questions around how these organizations lead partnerships lead to outcomes, what kind of resources are leveraged. So lots of different ways of looking at the data to ask questions. So I bring this forward so that you can be thinking in your mind about questions that you might have. Going forward, we're interested in what you make of the learnings, what you might be interested in learning more about. So I wanted to pose some questions that we hope you will consider, bringing back to the team in a way that will allow us to use the data in a way to take action steps and build strategies around how to strengthen our community network for regional housing partnerships going forward. Carly mentioned that we did use our platform. It's called the Partner CPRM. It's an ecosystem data tracking and learning platform. It's a way that communities can put all of their members of their ecosystem in one place, in one database, build member profiles about those members, and then be able to continue to collect data over time. So the good news is we'll be able to do all these kinds of things. The team will have that data going forward in an interactive way to both do just kind of regular analysis, what I would refer to as like seeing charts and graphs and learning about those data, but also mapping on in a geospatial way. We have a connection to ArcGIS. So lots of different ways that you can kind of map out the ecosystem and even do sub-network analysis. Like for example, in this case, we pulled out some of the habitat data that the data that Habitat was interested in around advocacy. So I'm not presenting that today, but the opportunities for that, because it is here in the platform, allow us to do that kind of work. So to get started, I'm just going to talk about some of the key findings, and then I'm going to break those down and show those a little bit more visually. So, what we learned is the regional housing partner definitely demonstrates strong connectivity and trust, supported by high levels of reliability, mission alignment, and open communication among members. So, what we know from the get-go was we were not starting from scratch. This is a community that has well-developed relationships. We'll see that as we go forward. And we, again, just wanted to capture that to get started with. So we're not saying we're going to start a new network, but really what we want to do is look at that social fabric of connection and see where we can build on it. We saw that nonprofits serve as central bridges linking government and private partners across the region. Respondents showed strong alignment around the network's top priorities, which were listed as or chosen as access and stability, production and supply, and network and process building, reflecting the shared commitment to advancing regional housing goals. Many partnerships operate at the awareness or cooperative level. I'll share that finding with you in a moment. This is a scale. Awareness and cooperative are kind of on the low end of the scale. So there is a lot of opportunity here for us to build that out and build out a more kind of resource intense relationship. So, partnership outcomes include resource exchange and improved organizational capacity. These were things that were selected by respondents. The respondents emphasize the importance of collaboration and resource sharing, and resource and capacity gaps do exist, particularly in housing production, preservation, and financing. So I'm going to break this down into a couple of findings around these goals. So the three goals that the RHP has stated as guiding for us were part of a question that we asked respondents, where you'll see here the question that we asked folks said, how much should the Kansas City Regional Housing Partnership prioritize each of the goals? So again, these were the three that the organization has focused on up to this point. You'll see one, two, and three. But there was great agreement across all of these respondents that these were where we should be focusing. You'll see the purple is indicating those that said, yes, we should be looking at this. We have a great deal of agreement with that. Fair amount is the green kind of turquoise color here. So in all cases, that was a pretty high agreement on those. Just a few saying a small amount, or mostly I don't know. Very few saying not at all. But network and processes was listed as kind of lower than the others. I think that's just very common. We are focused on the outcome measures first, and then the processes second. So that feels like a really natural way to see that. Okay, so across goal one, we looked at the network end process. So what you're seeing here is a network map, and it probably looks a little like just a huge spider web, right? So what I want to do is just make a little bit of sense of this for you. So this was the 313 organizations that were identified in the network. Whether they responded or not, they show up in the network map. So what shows up with all these dark lines, these gray lines, are the 2,828 relationships mentioned between them. So each of these organizations is called a node. This is not a live map, but in our dashboards, when you click on one, you can see who they are and information about them. You'll see that we did have a taxonomy of how we coded each of these organizations. So you'll see that over here. And you'll see that the public local government organizations had the largest number at 87 represented in there as the blue nodes. And then the community-based nonprofits, there were 72 of them. So you'll see it's quite mixed. You do see kind of a pattern of the blue nodes over here with less over in this section. And so just at a glance, you can just see that there's lots of integration. The larger nodes are those with the most number of connections. So again, this is very just kind of high level. In the dashboard, we can filter all of this, even by each of these areas. So there's lots of learning to do. For this presentation, all we did here was look at it in one other way, where we just really tried to distinguish between those that were government, nonprofit, or private sector. So the government agencies, again, tend to lay out here a little bit on this periphery over here, which means they're not as well connected as some of these nonprofit and private sector organizations that start to cluster here in the middle. But over here, you'll see the data this is the same data, just in a different view. So you'll see the government, private, and nonprofit look. So I bring this forward so that you can see that this is just a networked visualization of these same data of how many there are. This adds the connections between them. And then respondents indicated the housing sectors which they are engaged. So when we asked people about their activities in each of these areas, you'll see that 67% of the 140 plus respondents said they were working in housing advocacy, formally or informally. Where you'll see less activity is down here in real estate, direct housing services, and areas like that. So this may not surprise you. It may be what you expect, but this helps us to start to understand where we have more activity and less throughout the network. We also asked organizations where they provide services. So this is just another view of the network. You'll see that 74% of all respondents said that they are providing services in Jackson County, and far less in Miami. Again, this may not surprise you, but just a little layout here of where these respondents said they provide services. So what we are missing are non-respondents who didn't answer the question. So there could be more services provided in each of these. It could say something about who responded to know where those percentages are showing up. All right, so I'm just going to go through a few more of the findings. We asked a question that was, from your perspective, is there too little, the right amount, or too much of each of these resources available in the greater Kansas City regional housing system? So what you'll see here is that in the purple line, these are responses that said there is too little of housing production in the area, as well as housing preservation. Down here, you'll see, for example, less mention of too little real estate services. In fact, there are some that said there are too much, as well as housing regulation and or compliance, too much of that. So the yellow is a strong I don't know category in some of these areas. So you can see how this is kind of broken out. Again, this could help us prioritize where to direct policy initiatives, funding initiatives, and things like this. I do think this mimics a lot of what we're seeing around the country in these categories. So this felt like familiar information. Um, but we also ask people which of these areas is their most important role in the network. And here we see less of a variance in all of the responses, although we do see people most commonly saying they are working in housing finance and funding as their top priority, their top role. Um, and then you'll see down here, housing preservation, advocacy starts to become less and less. So what's interesting is only 4% said their top role is real estate services, but we see above that there is a perception that there's too little of real estate services here. Sorry, I think I said that wrong a little bit earlier. Oh no, I did say it right. So what we see is that even though there's not as many saying that's their top role, most of the community is agreeing that there is just the right amount or maybe even too much. So those are some interesting ways we can look at the data in those different ways. I'm going to go through a few more of these, and I'll pause just to look at the chat to make sure I'm not missing any big questions. Um, but this was an interesting question that we ask folks. So what you're seeing here is a representation of all 2,828 relationships. So when it says 24%, it's 24% of that number. We ask folks when they pick a partner and they describe their relationships with them to describe the relationship as either having just awareness only of the partner, involving cooperative activities, coordinated activities, and then integrated activities. We call this a relationship intensity scale. Those relationships that involve integrated activities often include things like MOUs or shared resources, maybe financial exchange, where cooperative activities you can see maybe a little bit less resource intensive, like exchanging information, attending meetings together, offering resources. So this scale kind of goes up, and each category includes the one below it. So what we see here is that most of our relationships in this community were reported as being awareness only of each other or cooperative. Um, so what that tells us, and what we've been studying the effectiveness of networks for about 2 decades. What we know about sustainable and effective networks is that most of their relationships actually hover here in the center, in between cooperative and coordinated activities. What we want to be careful of is that we're not trying to push a bunch of relationships into integrated, because we know people in community, our organizations do not have the resources to maintain highly integrative relationships at this kind of level. So real healthy networks kind of hover here in the middle. So what we're seeing is a little bit of opportunity to move our relationships from cooperative up to coordinated, and especially to go from awareness only into cooperative. So this is an area where we can test, look at the data over time and see how it moves. If the decision is made to invest more in this work, we could create a goal to move these numbers up to higher numbers around maybe coordinated activities and even integrated, depending on where we want to go and what we're trying to achieve. So this is a kind of neat scale to look at over time, and tells us that we do have a lot of relationships here, but not as many as we might move into this middle section. And then finally, in this section, we measured what we refer to as the trust between the relationships and value. So I should be real clear, this is perceptions by the respondent of the partners they picked. We never use the word trust, but we do ask folks to rate each other, the partners, on their reliability, mission congruence, and openness to discussion around housing. Each of these were ranked on a scale of 1 to 4, with the 4 being a great deal and a 1 being not at all. So you'll see here in the trust area, what we did, we're not showing individual relationships. We never will. We're going to keep all of the data anonymous and confidential. But what we do see here is it aggregated up to the whole network. So you'll see an overall trust score, which is an average of these 3. And then this is an average of all of the relationships. So the 2,828 relationships, and their reported trust relationships on each of these dimensions. So what we always look for is a measure of 3 or better as being the most positive in the network, because that means that everybody has picked a fair amount or a great deal. So within this network, we had really high scores for trust, and you'll see that's, it's actually, even given the variance in the scores, came out on average fairly high. So that's very good news for the community. Around perceptions of value, we asked folks to rate each other on power and influence, the level of involvement in the work, and the resources that folks can contribute. What we do know is that some people who are very powerful and influential, and maybe have a lot of resource to contribute, may not be involved. So we start to see more variation in the scores around some of these perceptions. And what you'll see here is a little bit of a lower average across overall value in each of these areas, especially resource contribution. So this is an area where there's definitely some work that we could do. This is usually related to resource contribution around some awareness of who has resources to contribute. So there's often a lack of understanding of who has resources to contribute, so the number will drop. But even around power and influence, what we didn't do here, which we can do, is break this up even across sectors. We can look at power and influence in the private, public, nonprofit sector, and see the variations in that as well. And one thing that we talk a lot about in our network science community is how more is not always better. So more connections does not always mean that's better, but also more trust and value is not, we shouldn't take that for granted that we just need more of it. What we need to do is set a goal, and an intention. We call them intentional network strategies that say, we really need to increase resource contribution among our members. And then that way we can look back to this data to see where some of those lower scores are coming from. Sorry, we had one more in this section, the partnership outcomes. So we asked people when they listed their relationships, what was the outcome of those relationships? So what we see here is that most, 56%, said that they've been informative only. And then you'll see a much lower percentage here for some more tangible outcomes, like led to an exchange of resources, improved my organization's capacity. This is not bad news. What this is showing us is, if our intention, it really mimics the resource intensity scale. If most of them were cooperative and aware only, then exchanging information is very aligned with that. It correlates with that very highly. So what we're seeing here is that there's a lot of information exchange going on. There is room here to improve some of the other outcomes. So again, depending on what the intention is, what the strategy is that we build out around this, we can use this as a baseline measure to say, if client referrals is something that we're interested in, can we increase that score from 18 to something higher in a future? Look at this. But we also looked at other kinds of outcomes like improved services or supports, new program development, and things like that. You'll see that we didn't see anyone report that there was a change in state policy or federal policy and very little in local. I don't know if that. How that relates to the efforts around advocacy, but that could be an area where there is a direct kind of call to action here for some improvements. Um, okay, I'm going to go into goal two, and I don't want to pause entirely, but I did just want to check really quick with Carly and Hannah to see if you all saw any questions that I could pause on and answer. And if not, I'll keep going. I won't have time to go through all of that.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions in the chat, but I think I was mostly able to answer them. But just to clarify for everyone, yes, this meeting is being recorded, and as long as the recording works out, we plan on sending it out along with Danielle's slides after this meeting. And then, so just so you know, Danielle, so Jim Stacy asked a question about what activities are included in the real estate activities that you mentioned. I think that's a great question. I sent the list that were included in the survey, but yeah, a great point that for each of the items, advocacy, policy, data, we had a sub list of, if you took the survey, you know this, because I know there were a lot of options, but a sub list of categories of different activities that fall within each of those.
Yeah,
Um, so,
perfect.
and then there is
Okay.
an additional question here. Joey asks, how did you all determine which organizations to include in this network? I'm especially curious how smaller or emerging groups were considered, since a lot of relationship building and trust happens at that level too.
Yeah. Did you already
Which I
answer
can
that one?
answer.
Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So, Joey, that's a great question. And I think it's important to point out that this was the first time we've done the survey. It is not our plan that this is a one and done kind of thing. We took existing lists that um, uh, several of the like Mark and Lisk had, as well as some other existing list of this network that we're building through the RHP for contacts. And that's what we use. And then I mean, it was just, it hadn't been done before, so we didn't have like a set list that we were going off of. And so it is something that is still in the process. And I'm positive there are people that we missed. And so that's why we're hoping to host these conversations. And as we grow the network, we'll certainly loop people in going forward. But with that said, we were intentional about trying to think about putting our brains together around who are the folks that we're missing. We reviewed the list several times. I don't know, Carly, if you have additional comments on that.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that it was based on current list that we had from some previous data gathering that we had done on the housing network, but also this will be a survey that will be done again. This was a benchmark, as Danielle mentioned previously, and so there will be opportunity for other organizations who were not in the original iteration to participate in the survey in the future. Well, I was going to talk about that at the end, but it will likely be at the start of next year when we're ready to send out the survey again and capture those folks that weren't able to participate because the goal is to be able to grow the RHP network.
Yeah.
Yeah, but great question. Yeah, and it was a hard process to try to get anybody, the full list of who's doing this work because there's so many great people doing this work across the region. So we know it was imperfect, but um, happy to get people looped in for the next iteration.
Yeah.
All right,
Um,
Jimmy.
I'll I'll add from kind of the nerdy side of things. We call this process bounding the network. And I've done this work with hundreds of communities, and the hardest part every single time is bounding the network and trying to put that list together. Hannah said it's imperfect, and I think it will always feel that way. But we often try to create some kind of definition or understanding of what an organization, how they would fall into the group, and then also ask other other people for that as well. And we felt a little bit of that tension here. There in a housing network, there's so many diverse types of organizations. So it was really hard to kind of reach out and cover all of those. So yeah, it's a list in there. We don't identify the nodes by their names, but we can look at it by those different ways of seeing the network. I also, okay, so I'll go on here to this next part. We're going to ask you at the end different ways that you might want to see more of the data or get more engaged. So keep that in mind. And if there are things that are popping up that you're like, this just doesn't feel like enough information, let us know because that's the kind of thing we can put together as more support for understanding the data going forward. Um, Okay, so our goal two, the first goal was where we had the most focus and the most information. So I went through that kind of quickly because I wanted to make sure that we had enough time for all the parts. But I will go ahead and move into this one. Sorry, now I have the chat open, which I'm about to close, and I just saw Rachel's question. In the dashboard, the nodes are numbered. So, and then we would have to turn on the ability to see who they are. But the dashboard in that way wouldn't be public if we decide not to have those show up that way. And so I will say this at Visible Network Labs, we just believe really strongly in the democratization of data. So when we take data from community, we love to give it back in any way that we can. So there are features in the platform that allow the users, which in this case, I'm just going to refer to Hannah and Carly as the user team would make those decisions based on the confidentiality and anonymity that we want to provide, and also use cases for people who could come in and see the data. So there's different ways that the publicness of the data can be shared, but they are turned off by default, so nothing will be shared by accident. Um, Okay, so I'm going to keep going. So on goal two, we were looking at production and supply. This is producing and preserving attainable housing across the region. So what we did here is we really dug into a list of different types of ways that people are engaged in housing, from advocacy to the four that you'll see here. I believe there's four. So each of these sections, like here, we would ask first a question that said, "Are you involved in housing production?" And then if they said the respondent said yes, there would be a set of questions that asked got us more information about that. So, for example, I'll use advocacy, even though we're not presenting it today. If we said, "Do you do advocacy work?" that would follow up with more specific questions about what kind of advocacy. So in this case, what you're seeing are those, though, related to our goal two. So here you'll see housing production was a question. You'll see 48% of our respondents said, yes, I do housing production, where 52% said no. Then we asked as the follow-up, you'll see 5 is the question, and then 5A is the follow-up. Which of the following roles does your organization play in housing production? So here you'll see that most are self-identify as nonprofit developers, and then followed by rehab builder, rehabber, or professional services, including engineering, architecture, and others. So what you'll see here are the kind of different categories. Again, this can help us understand where we have a strong amount of resources and presence in the network and where we may need to find and fill some of those gaps. On housing preservation, again, you'll see we had more folks say yes in this question, 52. And most of those were connected to home repair, nonprofit developer. So you see less of variance in that scale. Two others that we pulled out from a rather long list, so there's many more than just these. Housing financing and funding. You'll see that most folks said no, I don't do that work, but those that do, you can see where they kind of fell in the responses here. Most are funders. We see some mortgage lenders, private capital, commercial lenders, and state housing finance agencies. We did have an opportunity to put in others and then to specify their responses. So we'll continue to look at those responses, especially some of them are actually redundant to other responses in this question and others. So we want to make sure that we are taking a good look at those as well. We also asked about housing regulation and compliance. Again, you'll see 36% said yes. Most of those who said yes, 78%, are doing local regulation and compliance. They could pick more than one here, which is why this doesn't equal 100%. So you'll see some other areas, federal, state, HUD funding, areas of compliance. So that just gave us a little bit of an inventory of who was doing what. So we went into great depth and those questions. So you'll see that in the survey, you would have seen that. So here we had the least amount of information around access and stability. So here we were looking at, increased stability of and access to attainable housing options for all residents. What we were really only able to focus on here, because the survey was getting rather long, was really looking at the target populations that people respondents said they were focused on. So you'll see that the question was, does your organization's work center or target any of the following specific populations? So this is just kind of a long list. You'll see that most of our respondents focus on low to moderate income families and families and children. Um, a large number said none. I do not focus on any of these, which is kind of an interesting response from a third of the respondents. But you will see these other areas down here. Again, an interesting list that helps us understand when we are ready to focus our efforts in different areas. We can look up who the folks are that are focused on people with developmental disabilities, for example, and focus in that area. What we did here was cross-tab two of the data points that we've already shown you. So we asked people where do they provide services, and then we cross-tabbed it with the target populations. So you'll see the darker boxes are mostly darker because we did have most people say that they provide services in these areas where the boxes are darker. But here you can kind of see where for example, Jackson County, you see a little bit of a more even spread across the different populations with folks who might say, I'm working with family and children, also working with BIPOC communities, homeless communities, justice involved, for example. So we do see some consistency there with some differences, for example, especially for example, here, like in a rural community where we might have, or I'm not sure which are rural and which are not, but we have greater services provided to folks like farm workers and some of these other areas. So we can cross-tab a lot of the data like this, and that makes it really helpful for us to see kind of where there are some strengths and where there are some gaps. All right, so I am going to move into looking at so that we can have a conversation about outcomes and next steps. And I know Carly and Hannah are going to help a little bit with that. This is just kind of a couple of screenshots from one of our online dashboards. So the dashboards look a lot like the data that I just shared with you. The data that I just shared with you is compiled into a report at the moment. These are actually all interactive online. We didn't want to share the dashboard today because we're still talking and having conversations about what that dissemination looks like. But the online version of the dashboards do look like this, where you can click on the columns and the rows, for example, and see organizations that are within those categories. Since we don't know that we want to share all that information just yet, we don't have it live in that way. But it's a really great place to be able to summarize the data into small bites of information. We encourage the team to use this if they are going to present to a legislator or at a conference and want to share some data live with the audience, you can put a QR code up and let folks see the dashboard. So, given data governance over this, with that always in mind, it's a great tool for being able to um, go through the data. It will always update as new responses come in, or we can do like side by side of maybe a time one and then a time two. Similarly, we have something called a member profile. They will look kind of like this. I didn't put up screenshots of this because it would look too similar, but a member profile is for each particular organization. So what you're looking at here is like the data of the whole community, the whole ecosystem. Member profiles just narrow in on one organization. So when we think about and plan out that dissemination, what that does is it allows you, the organization, to see your own data. There is a tool to turn on so that people could start to see each other's, which would be a great lookup tool if we want to have this data more as a directory or something of that sort. But the member profile lets you see your information and kind of how you sit within the larger network. We've always found that that is a really great resource for people when you are applying for a grant, for example. Your funder is probably asking you, are you engaged in your community? Do you have partnerships? So the member profile will let you have a little bit of that data to, for example, share in your grant application or in your own annual reports. And so we love that because what it does, building the capacity of each individual member of this ecosystem is really as important as building the whole ecosystem's capacity. And we know that it's the sum of our parts. So when each organization is building their own capacity, winning new funding, getting new program in there, building their resources out, it will strengthen the whole ecosystem. So that's something else that is within the platform. So I'm going to turn it over to Carly and Hannah here to talk about where we go from here, and then this number two about what happens if you're really intrigued and want to take a survey after all this. So Carly, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. We appreciate your time and all the effort. It's been a great experience working with your team over these last many months. Your expertise is amazing, and we really appreciate your effort. Um, to that, we only have a few minutes left, and I think we may have some time for a few questions at the end. But as Dr. Varda mentioned, the dashboard that exists for the Regional Housing Partnership Network will be available on our website very soon. We haven't gotten a chance to embed it on there yet, but it will be available. And the question that we have, if you all would like to do something like this again and have an opportunity to learn more about the dashboard in more detail, as well as member profiles and how you can interact with each of those and learn how to explore them. If you would be interested in participating in an additional webinar about the dashboard and member profiles, we have a survey that you can just let us know if that's something that would be worthwhile for us to put together. I think there's a poll in the chat for that.
I'm
Hannah?
going to launch, I was going to say, I'm going to launch that right now. So you'll see
Okay,
something pop up on your screen and just respond to it and let us know.
thank you. And also, as we mentioned, hold on just a second, sorry about that. As we mentioned previously, the participants in this version, in this iteration of the survey, were selected based on the current contacts of the network that we have. And it was really focused, bounded, as Danielle mentioned, by production and preservation. But we know that there are many more organizations that may work in those areas and in other areas across housing in the Kansas City region that were not captured. So please know that this will not be a one-time thing. We will be conducting the survey again. If it is not before the end of 2026, it will certainly happen in early 2027. So if you are a part of this webinar and you did not participate in the survey or did not receive an invitation link previously, you can just email myself or Hannah and let us know so that we can make sure that you are added to the invitation list the next time around. However, if you did receive an invitation link to participate in the survey previously and you were not able to complete the entire survey, we know that there are or get to a large, significant amount of completion of the survey. We know there are several folks that clicked on the link and maybe filled out one or two questions, but were not able to complete it. Please, we will be sending out an invitation link for you to complete the rest of the survey before May 15th. So please look for that. We want to make sure that we have your information captured since you were in the first round of survey invitations. And just one more thing to highlight. As Danielle mentioned in her presentation, there are opportunities to be able to interact with the data. It's sort of segmented in a tangible way, similar to the way that Habitat of Kansas City has done in order to look at advocacy, housing advocacy in the housing ecosystem. And they'll be doing some additional work on that. I think they've been sending out invitations to some workshops that they will have, particularly around housing advocacy over the next few weeks. And so that will give us an opportunity to look more closely at that segment of the network as well. I think we have just a few minutes. I'm not sure if I know that questions were being answered in the chat. I don't know if there were any that were rising to the top that we didn't get a chance to cover.
No, I think we got most of them answered. I did just want to call out. We had a couple questions just around like what was going to be included in the member profiles and what folks would be able to see about like their organization and others. And those are really great questions and appreciate that feedback. It's something that we're considering. Just knowing that, this survey is based on perceptions, one individual's perception of other organizations. And so we want to be really careful just about how we share that information. And so that's something that we're considering. We haven't determined exactly how we're going to get this information out and what that's going to look like, but we appreciate your guys' feedback and definitely want to do what's going to be most helpful and beneficial to the network overall. So something that we're working on because we got a
And
couple of questions about that.
can I follow up on that?
Please.
And that one thing that Hannah just said, no matter what we share, no one will ever see how you responded. Ever, ever, ever. That's just not something that will ever be shared. So what you may see in a member profile is like your score of the average score of folks who rated you if we choose to show that, but you'd never see who said what. So I just want to make sure that feels really protected within this. And the other thing is, Rachel, I see your questions in there, and I actually love them because this is the tension between what we refer to in the university world, as human subjects protection. So making sure people, we're going through they're called institutional review boards that we are promising, to protect people's data. But what I always say, the irony is in these maps and in all of this work, if you don't know who's who, you lose so much information and so much value. And Rachel, I think that's hopefully that is what you are asking about. I'm not getting that wrong, but it's almost the most frustrating part is that we do lose a lot of that ability to kind of make sense of the relationships and take next steps. But it's an important balance, of course, especially in a time when many of us are worried about our data and where it's going and who has it. So it's a real tension in community work. We can't fix what we can't see, so it's just really hard. But you have a really strong team here in the community that's going to protect both, and also I'm sure leverage as best they can the data and share it as much as possible. So we'll help do that. We'll be good partners in that and have worked on that across communities over time. So have some good ideas for that too, as well.
Awesome. And then just a couple of other things. I have been monitoring the chat and have already been seeing some great networking going on in the chat of like, hey, you do this, do you do this work and on the Kansas side or on the Missouri side, or can we partner? So that's really exciting to see going on while we're talking about this. So just so Danielle, that's
Okay,
happening in the
yeah.
background as
Yeah.
well.
Well, and I see Anna in there. We did some work with them with the Habitat group on advocacy, and I'm glad that that will be shared as well. It's
Yeah.
amazing how much you can pull out. Almost any one of these categories you can do kind of a sub study on as well. I'm sorry I'm going to ask this out loud, but I don't know. I see the share results button on the poll, but I don't know if I'm only seeing that because I'm a co-host.
Yes, that's because you're
Um,
a co-host. I was
should
gonna
I?
say so also about the poll, if you guys want to see it, I can share it. But it looks like a lot of people are very interested in all of those topics that we sent out. So the data dashboards, the member profiles, and network engagement. So we will definitely be finding additional opportunities to provide trainings. We understand this was just the very first step in seeing, okay, we sent out this massive survey. What did the data look like? What are we seeing from there? We're going to host additional trainings and find additional opportunities for the network to use this information and really use it as a resource going forward. So we really appreciate your all's response to that survey, and we'll definitely be in touch with additional opportunities as we get those together. So are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, but we have 3 more minutes. So if anybody has something you'd like to ask. If not, any final thoughts from Danielle or Carly?
Here's my email. If anyone
Yeah.
wants to reach out, I have a team of people. I'm always happy to connect anytime. But also, Carly and Hannah, though, are your first, you know, way to go to get any questions answered about the community. But yeah, please reach out anytime.
Thank you, everyone. If you have, you may or may not have seen that Anna Van Brunt added in the chat her email address if you're interested in participating in the advocacy workshops that Habitat for Humanity is hosting. You can reach out to Anna for that. I'm also including my email address in the chat as well in case you don't already have that. Please feel free to email myself or Hannah with questions. Thank you all so much for taking your lunch hour to join us for this conversation, and we will be looking forward to inviting you to future conversations to learn more about the data that we've gathered. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.